COVID-19 has really become a tool for persecutors against Christians.
In a world that continues to reel from the global pandemic that seems to have no end in sight, we look to other places around the world where even worse than getting COVID is simply being a Christian. Today on the program, we talk with Fadi Sharaiha about Christianity in the Middle East and North Africa and the dire need to report this in media. Kiaa Alipour speaks about Iran's efforts to quash Christianity, but the religion is still growing. Plus, a man who miraculously defected from North Korea tells his story of survival. And Greg Mussleman speaks to how the Christian faith is flourishing despite persecution on all fronts. But first, Gary Stagg explains the astonishing numbers behind the 2021 World Watch List. Here's Maggie John.
North Korea, Afghanistan, and Somalia topped this year's World Watch List, an extensive group of the most dangerous places to be a Christian. Gary Stagg is the executive director of Open Doors Canada, the organization that publishes the World Watch List, and joins us now. Now, Gary, thanks for joining us today. North Korea has topped this list for now over 20 years. It seems it's impossible for Christians to survive in this closed-off country. Tell us why.
Well, it's the minute that somebody confesses that they're a Christian in North Korea, if you decide that you're going to take that step and follow Jesus, basically you're pretty much guaranteed that you will be sent to a brutal labor camp. And not only you, but also your entire family and extended family members as well. So most of our brothers and sisters in North Korea will try to keep it as quiet as they can. In fact, they will not even let their children know that they are born into a Christian home until such a time that they feel that the children can be trusted with that information, because the whole regime is set up to basically get that information out of those children as they go to school. They'll ask diagnostic questions about, if there's a black book in your house and what does it look like, and so on. And so they really do just have to keep it quiet. It's a secret church for sure.
That's fascinating. Things that we take for granted, like making sure that our children know about our faith as early as possible. Many of our brothers and sisters in North Korea have to hide that from their children. Wow, just allowing that to sink in. In the past month, at least 100 people have been killed by an Islamic extremist group in a series of attacks in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we're hearing a lot of them are Christians. What do you know about this?
There's just been a barrage of attacks on Christians and Christian villages, just wiping out almost all communities, in that burning the communities out. They're not always killed, but oftentimes that is the case. There's a big rise in violence for sure, and especially during these times when we're all suffering through this pandemic, it's even a greater risk for our brothers and sisters in these countries.
Yeah, keeping it mindful of what they're going through as well. Now, according to the watch list, 1 in every 8 Christians around the world are persecuted for their faith. That varies in many ways. Can you give us some examples?
Oftentimes when we talk about persecution, people automatically think in terms of violence. But in most cases, it's not violence, although we have seen an increase in violence, and that is certainly a real threat to Christians around the world. But for the most part, it's the daily squeeze on their lives. It's the being denied proper education for their children, just being denied jobs because they are Christians. In these countries, in most of these countries, they have to have on their identification, their government identification has to have their religion listed on it. And so as soon as they find out they're Christians, they are just marginalized immediately. And so they live with that daily pressure all the time. And that after a while really has a way of wearing people down. And of course, the whole approach is so that the church would be weakened.
Well, thank you again, Gary, for sharing such important information. I'm stuck with so many things that you've said today. Again, Gary Stagg, Executive Director of Open Doors Canada. Thank you. Thank you for continuing to publish this World Watch List and keeping it top of mind, especially for the church here in the West, of how we need to pray and who we need to pray for. Thank you. Christians are not the only persecuted people of faith in the world, but they are the most persecuted. There are many denominations that make up the Christian faith. Context executive producer Susan Ponting talks with Fadi Sharaiha about those denominations, specifically in the Middle East and North Africa.
Fadi, thank you so much for being here. How many Christian denominations are there currently?
There are two main things, Eastern and then the Western. And the Western, I mean by Western, Catholic, Anglicans, and then the Eastern by Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox. From the Greek Orthodox, we have different denominations like Coptics and Ethiopians. But the problem would be with the Protestant, where we have so many. We have the Anabaptists, and from the Anabaptists, we have so many like the Baptists and other denominations as well.
That is a fact, correct? That Christians are the most persecuted?
Actually, it is a fact, but the problem is that the media, they don't talk about this. So we don't know in Canada, yeah.
Why do you think that is?
So many things. One, in Canada, and I'll be very honest, we try to be very, I would say very diplomatic around it and try to do the right thing and say the right thing. So that's why we don't talk about people in Egypt were harassed, or people were killed in Africa because of their faith. Actually, we have around 4,000 or 5,000 people being killed each year because of their faith in different countries. We don't talk about this.
Where in the Middle East and North Africa is the situation the worst for Christians?
Well, this is a good question because it really varies from one country to another. Let me put it this way. Christians go through different harsh time being Christian in the Middle East, North Africa, and all over the world. And by the way, this is coming to Canada as well. So if you are waiting for this, it is coming to Canada. And actually, I'm embracing it. Promise us that we will be pressured, we will be persecuted against. But with this comes the grace of God. And in Canada, the government having a law according to the Islamophobia law, for example, is one good example. You can talk badly about any religion like Christianity or Christians, but you cannot talk about the religion of Islam. I mean, why not to talk about different religions the same way? Why not to have the same standard for all?
Why do you think there is an Islamophobia bill?
Canadians, we are so polite, and we think that because of Christianity is the religion of the white people, then we need to give, the non-white, religion more freedom or more space to explain more about themselves, which is a wrong thing because Christianity started in the Middle East. But you cannot enforce religion on people. You cannot impose religion on people.
It's so interesting that Christianity, God pitched his tent in the Middle East, and church started out as what it's become now, which is in the home. Of course, we have Zoom, but over here, it's grown into this big mega church kind of thing. But it's like this year during COVID, we're back to home church.
You're right. But mind you that we have Christian brothers and sisters from China more than we have from the US or Canada. Okay, just to remind you. So whenever I drive down the street, I see churches closing down. While whenever I go to the MENA, whatever country, you would have Christians coming together. Listen, I know more pastors in Canada by the name of Muhammad, more than Mike and James, okay? Which means that people are not only coming to faith, but they are very much practicing, basically some kind of ministry. So, and this is a chance for us, one, to reflect and repent as a church in Canada, and then go back to the roots and go back to the, look at Canada, like as a country, the whole country was established on Christian or biblical, concept and foundations. Where are we from that? If you go to Ottawa, the parliament, they have verses all over. Even the national anthem, is taken from the Bible, from Old Testament. So where is that in our sense right now? We don't find it anymore, which is Christian heritage that you don't find all over. I find it maybe in Manitoba more than whatever I see in Toronto, Ontario.
Wow, yeah. What do you attribute that to?
Again, basically, I think that we took things for granted. Let me put it this way. Whenever you are blessed, you take things for granted. So as a church with a capital C in Canada, we took things for granted. And we are not really educating our kids. We are not living the Christian anymore as we used to. That's why my favorite place to visit is a small town in Manitoba, like Winkler, going to Toronto, because people over there are more, more engaged in that sense. And also we don't have a story to tell, and this is the problem. I think we don't have a story with Jesus to tell. We don't have, like, on daily basis, what's happening. What is the Lord teaching me today? What is happening in that sense?
Fadi, thank you so much for the work you do at MENA, and thank you for educating us today. A real pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure. Thank you.
115 Iranian Christians were arrested in 2020, though only 52 of those arrests were publicly reported. My next guest says Iranians are seeking God more than ever, even in the face of persecution. Kiaa Alipour works with Article 18, an organization dedicated to the protection and promotion of religious freedom based on Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights by the United Nations. Kiaa, thanks so much for joining us today. Now, Iran remains on the world watch list, and yet the Iranian government says no one is persecuted on religious grounds. What is reality like for Christians in that country?
Thank you for having me. Well, it's a longer story. Christian community, along with other religious minorities, face systematic state persecution and discrimination in Iran. Iran has ethnic and non-ethnic Christians. Ethnic Christian communities are permitted a degree of freedom to worship, although they also suffer restriction and discrimination in a larger scale. But the growing community of Christian converts or non-ethnic Christians is not even permitted to attend recognized churches, and they have to gather for worship in secret house churches and risk arrest and imprisonment. As you mentioned, in the year 2020, 115 Iranian Christians were arrested. 2 Iranian Christians were flogged only for drinking wine as a part of communion. Others were denied education or employment, and one couple were told they could no longer retain custody for their adopted lovely daughter, Lydia, on account on their faith. This is the reality for Christians in Iran.
Children being taken away from their parents because of their faith. Now, you came to faith, Kiaa, in Jesus in the Netherlands after you fled Iran, and you say there is a hunger for Jesus in Iran. Tell us more about that. Why is there such a hunger?
It is such a huge hunger, and this is unbelievable. Just to give you an example, before the revolution of 1979, there were approximately 500 or 600 believers from Muslim background in Iran. But now, according to several reports, Iran is one of the most growing evangelical churches in the world. Approximately more than 800,000 Christians live in Iran, and the majority of them are converts. And this is a conservative estimate, by the way. We shouldn't forget that many converts do not report their faith publicly due to fear of persecution. So we see from one side persecution is growing, on the other side God is at work. Yeah. And the Iranian regime is also very, very fearful of the growth of Christianity in Iran. Why? Because if more and more Iranians convert to Christianity, the legitimacy of Iranian regime, which is based on Islamic theocracy, not democracy, Islamic theocracy, will be totally lost. And this is one of the reasons that the persecution is on the rise. But obviously, as you also mentioned, we see that God is also at work in Iran.
Yeah, that gave me goosebumps as you talked about that. I have to ask you this question, Kiaa. You know, I'm always fascinated at the fact that there are so many people who will risk their lives for their faith. And there is a surge of the underground churches in Iran. Why is it that these people continue to risk their lives for a faith that they believe in, even though that they know that they might face imprisonment, death, even loss of their children?
Well, you're absolutely right, Maggie. First of all, persecution results from our identification with Christ. And for the past 4 decades, the number of Christian converts has increased, as we mentioned, and that has alarmed Iranian authorities. Therefore, they all have begun placing more restrictions on church attendees, violating freedom of worship, and shutting down Iran's main Persian language Bible publisher, even extrajudicial killing of the church leaders inside the country. But despite all risks, Christians gather together in house churches or online churches. During the pandemic, for example, many Christians in Canada and worldwide were forced to have fellowship online. Probably you did it as well. But for many years, online churches in Iran have been providing fellowship, teachings, trainings, and counseling even for the isolated believers, because they cannot easily have fellowship. This is what we have over here, and we shouldn't take it for granted. And they should be, by the way, they should be very careful, Iranians, I mean, with the cyber army of the Iranian regime. So even coming online and having fellowship online is very risky.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kiaa Alipour from Article 18. Thank you so much for your time and also for your work.
You're most welcome.
Coming up on theCUBE, Greg Mussleman of 100 Huntley Street and the Voice of the Martyrs shares the horrific stories of forced marriage and conversion in Pakistan and Eritrea. That's coming up.
Like to watch more context beyond the headlines? Catch up on any of our shows online. On YouTube, search Context Beyond the Headlines for the most up-to-date episodes and extended content. Listen on the go with Apple, Spotify, or Google Podcast. Check out our reporters and producers' stories at our website, context.show. Follow us on Instagram at Context Beyond the Headlines and Twitter at Context TV. There are so many ways to put more context into your life.
As a Canadian, going to North Korea for him was to be able to share the blessing of Canada to those in North Korea. And to know that Canada has stood for him, stood by him, we are so grateful for it.
We just heard the worst place to be a Christian is North Korea. Many Christians have died there, and some, like Canadian Pastor Lim, were miraculously released. Christine Yu now speaks with a man who experienced firsthand persecution in North Korea.
You were born in North Korea, you lived on the streets, you went through imprisonment for trying to escape your country. Can you tell us a little bit about that process, what that was like for you?
Yes. So by one sentence, I can describe a journey was a persevering journey until I have been able to manage to get into democratic society and life today where I am. And however, that process was I had to escape twice and imprisoned 4 times, which often I also think of this. Well, how I got this life into this moment, because of that process were quite challenging and scary, and you could not predict or expect anything what it could come to you in the next minute. So I am grateful for the life I have here at the moment, particularly that I am able to attend church, freely worship, and how my faith was able to rely on God and to ask for His salvation and rescue of who I am today. Here I continue on with this.
Tell us a little bit about what Christian persecution looks like in North Korea.
When I was there, I had to escape, survive. And even right now, at this moment, the people are continue escaping from this country for survival. So particularly when I go deep into this conversation of faith, we all know that North Korea is the system of man of God, and the Kim family particularly, they would not allow anyone could follow and love of Jesus and comfort, and particularly when people read biblical scriptures. In the meantime, North Korea has created a system of prison, the whole society as a prison. If you want to be Christian and you have to escape to another country, that's another option. Like myself, who I am now, I can explore to talk about this freely. But if you are a Christian and they discovered, then your family is being taken to a prison camp.
How did you come to know God? How did you come to learn of Jesus Christ in your journey?
Thank you for asking that very important questions. I didn't know about God actually in North Korea. Well, what I experienced of seeing public persecution when I was a little boy. So this was happened, and I had to, unfortunately, I had to live on the street for a few years after my parents escaped to China during the early period of first wave of refugees influx into China. I didn't know anything about, but I heard from my neighbors around, the people who went to China and went to church. The church often provide them Bible, cloth, and some financial assistance, and they came back with all these kind of stories.
Now, some people may be tuning into the radio programs that are broadcast into North Korea through organizations like Open Doors. What would you want to say to those that may be listening?
You must do everything as much as that radio can go into North Korea. And from my own experience, I was waiting for foreign radios from outside. It comes, and particularly you have to listen to it during early morning when everyone is in bed. These are great opportunity equipment, and that radio, it brought me, it gave me kind of feeling of comfort and expectation to listen to something new from outside. Imagination, expectation, and hope, and general life stories. That's what they need for.
Well, we're going to leave it there, but thank you so much, Timothy, for joining us and for being a light and continuing to fight for the freedoms of your country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me once again.
Time now for theCUBE. 340 million Christians around the world suffer high levels of persecution for their faith. That is according to the World Watch List. I'm joined now by Greg Mussleman, who is on the front lines with 100 Huntley Street and as Minister at Large of the Voice of the Martyrs. Thank you so much for joining me, Greg.
Good to be with Maggie, and great to see you again.
Greg, the U.S. State Department has declared Pakistan as a country of particular concern when it comes to their violations of religious freedoms. You've seen and heard a number of the stories coming out of that country when it comes to persecution. Tell us what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, Pakistan has a very small Christian population, 1.6, and I've been there a few times, and I can tell you that not only Christians, but anybody that is not Muslim really suffer, intense persecution in many cases with job loss and the worst jobs. But I think the thing that affects me the most, Maggie, is the young girls, the 13, 14, 15-year-old girls that are often kidnapped, they are assaulted, sexually assaulted, and then forced into Islam and forced into marriages with men that are much older than they are. And it is heartbreaking, and that goes on about 1,000 times a year. Again, it's anybody that's not Muslim that is targeted, but especially the Christians who are really considered second class in that culture.
And Eritrea is another country that both of us have reported on over the years. Christians are imprisoned there at an alarming rate. Tell us about this, Greg.
Yeah, well, this goes all the way back to May of 2002 because of the growth of the evangelical church, which is often linked to the West, especially the United States, and the Eritrean government being very paranoid. Isaias Afwerki is the president, and anything that they see as, kind of Western, they come against. And then you also couple that with the fact that the state church also put pressure on the Eritrean government to stop the spread of evangelical Christianity, because many people were leaving the state church, the Orthodox church, and becoming evangelicals. In fact, there was one church, and I met leaders from there in the capital city of Asmara that was more than 10,000 people. So in May 2002, they made it that the churches had to register. And in that time, only a handful of churches and not evangelical churches got registered. And so the believers then would continue to meet. And at weddings, in their homes, they were arrested. And I think at the height of, in terms of Christians being in prison, Maggie, it was probably more than 3,000. It's difficult to know how many, followers of Jesus are imprisoned in Eritrea, but it's still in the hundreds. Now, there has been some good news recently because of the overcrowding and COVID. Those are not good things. But because of that, a number of evangelical Eritrean Christians have been released from prison. And some of them have been there for more than 5 years. They're kept in shipping containers, military prisons under horrible conditions. Many have died. Many have died trying to escape, going to Italy and drowning. It's a horrible situation, and we certainly need to pray.
Greg, we've been friends for quite a long time, and you've dedicated most of your life, a good chunk of your life, to telling these stories of our persecuted brothers and sisters around the world. What do we in the Western world need to be reminded of when we are hearing these accounts so that they just don't leave us and we move on with our lives?
Yeah, that's a great question, Maggie. I've been at this for, a couple of decades now. And, I find even still, it's so difficult, especially, when you're hearing these stories of these young girls like Arzu Raja in Pakistan, 14 years old. Now, after 2 weeks of being held captive, by this much older Muslim man who kidnapped her from the neighborhood, she was released. But she was so brainwashed, that she doesn't want to go home now. It's absolutely horrible, but at least she's at a safe house. Other girls have not been released and they've been impregnated, and it's horrible. But the stories themselves are so intense that we can sometimes just want to turn it off. But the most important thing we need to do is to pray. That's why I encourage people, go to vomcanada.com, find out about what's happening, hear their names, see their faces, and pray for them. And it's not just, hearing the suffering, Maggie, but it's also the amazing victory and the faith that they have. And so as we pray, I believe the Lord then leads us in how we can help. I mean, there's so many needs in this world. Your program, of course, highlights amazing things like sex trafficking, racism, and all the things that we're dealing with. But this is something that, when the Bible says, if one part of the body, the church, suffers, we all suffer. So praying, and then coming to their rescue to know that they are not alone, and they're people that care about them in this great country of Canada.
Greg Mussleman, host of 100 Huntley Street and minister at large at the Voice of the Martyrs. Thank you, Greg, for all that you do.
And thank you, Maggie, for all you do. God bless you, sister.
The plight of Christians around the world is one we need to be aware of and praying for. As we heard on today's show, 1 in 8 Christians around the world are persecuted because of their faith. The question is, why? Why do many still believe in Jesus if it means death? Why do they hold on to hope in a Savior they can be imprisoned or killed for worshiping? Maybe because they've experienced a hope that can only come from above, something for us in the West to remember. For the scriptures say, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." I'm Maggie John. Thanks for watching.